Come in, come in. Have a seat. I see you've brought that thick thesis draft with you, and judging by the look on your face, you're feeling pretty stressed. It's okay, just take a deep breath. Welcome to our academic mentoring session for today. Think of my office as a safe space for us to look over your writing. In this session, we're going to dive into something incredibly important but often dreaded by students: editing and revising your draft. All right, let's jump right in. The very first question that probably pops into your head when you see a draft bleeding with red ink and corrections is this: is my draft failing? I need you to throw that thought right out the window. Feeling completely exhausted after writing a first draft is entirely normal. Listen, there's literally no such thing as a perfect first draft. Changing your text, deleting paragraphs, or completely overhauling your structure, that's not a sign of weakness or failure. Actually, it's solid proof of your intellectual progress. It just shows that your ideas are maturing. But before we begin the actual surgery on your manuscript, we need to completely shift your mindset. We're going to bust some of the biggest myths about academic editing. So many young writers completely misunderstand what actually happens during this phase. The absolute biggest myth is thinking that editing is just about fixing your spelling and grammar. The reality? Academic editing is an intellectual evaluation. So the key takeaway here is that if you only focus on fixing commas and typos, you'll end up with a text that looks really neat on the surface, but is completely empty in terms of analysis. Language correction is just the cosmetic touch at the very end. Our main focus has to be on the structure of your thoughts. Here's another habit I really need you to break: editing while writing. Writing and editing use two completely different parts of your brain. Writing is a creative process, while editing is highly analytical. There's a myth that you can do both at the same time. In reality, obsessing over the perfect packaging of a sentence during your first draft will absolutely kill your flow. Just let the ideas pour out first and save that editing scalpel for later. And finally, please don't wait for inspiration or the right mood to strike before you start editing. Editing isn't some magical muse, it's pure discipline. If you wait for the mood, you'll end up with rushed, last-minute work and totally inconsistent quality. Real academic quality comes from a systematic routine and commitment. To manage your intellectual energy so you don't burn out, we're going to use a phased approach. Trying to fix everything all at once will just exhaust your brain. So we're splitting this into two main lenses: macro revision, which is our global check, and micro revision, our local check. We'll start with macro revision. Imagine you're examining the spine of your thesis. At this stage, we're looking at the big picture. Is your thesis clear? Is the structure logical? This is exactly where you need what I like to call intellectual courage. You have to be brave enough to delete or move beautifully written paragraphs if they don't serve your main thesis. Without a strong spine, all that pretty language is basically useless. For this macro revision, ask yourself a few critical questions. First, is your thesis consistent, or does it suddenly change focus in Chapter 3? Second, does every subchapter actually support the argument? I see this all the time. Students fall into the trap of uncontrolled topic expansion. They get carried away writing long histories or broad descriptions just to prove they did the reading. Control your scope. If it doesn't strengthen the argument, just cut it out. Okay, so how do we actually do this practically? Let me introduce you to my absolute favorite diagnostic tool, the reverse outlining technique. It's a remarkably powerful way to check the spine of your paper. Let me walk you through the steps. Read your draft, and next to every single paragraph, write a short sentence. But careful, don't write down what the content is, write down its analytical function. For example, supports argument with data, or introduces theory. Once you list these functions, a clear map of your thesis emerges. You'll immediately spot leaps in logic, or realize you have 3 paragraphs in a row just repeating the exact same information. From there, you can make sure your ideas are moving progressively forward. Beyond reverse outlining, here are 2 more macro strategies. First, try reading your draft non-stop in one sitting to test if a reader can follow the flow without getting stuck. Second, create some intellectual distance. Do not start editing the second you type the final period. Go grab a coffee, sleep on it, take 2 or 3 days off. When you come back, you'll see your manuscript with fresh, objective eyes, just like an outside reader. Still looking at the macro level, we have to check your flow and transitions. I always warn my students to watch out for argumentative leaps. That's when you jump to a massive conclusion without giving the reader enough analytical guidance to get there. You can't just assume the reader knows what's in your head. We have to guide them step by step.
And a good transition isn't just slapping the word therefore or furthermore at the start of a sentence. Honestly, that's just lazy writing. A real transition builds a logical bridge. The last sentence of your paragraph has to wrap up the idea and signal what's next, while the first sentence of the next paragraph seamlessly picks it up. If your reader has to stop and ask, wait, how did we get to this topic? Then your logical bridge just collapsed.
Now, only after our spine is solid do we bring out the magnifying glass. We move on to micro-revision. This is where we finally paint and decorate. We zoom in on sentence clarity, precise terminology, and the smooth flow from one sentence to the next. But remember, we only ever do this after the macro revision is completely done. At this micro stage, look closely at your paragraphs. The golden rule: one paragraph, one idea. If your paragraph is too short, it usually means it's lacking deep analysis. If it's too long, like a whole page, your reader's focus is going to scatter everywhere. Every single sentence in that paragraph must serve to unpack that one main idea.
So many students fall into these two specific traps. First is the data paragraph, where you just dump a bunch of statistics and quotes without any commentary, as if the data can speak for itself. The second is the opinion paragraph, where you write extensively about your personal views but offer zero empirical evidence. Academic writing needs intellectual symbiosis. Every time you drop a piece of data, it has to be immediately followed by your own analysis, answering the question, why does this matter to my thesis?
Clarity is absolutely everything here. If a sentence is incredibly tangled, way too long, stuffed with undefined technical jargon, or full of vague pronouns, well, that's a red flag that your own thoughts are still messy. Don't fall into the trap of thinking overly complex, flowery sentences make you sound smarter. True scholars value precision. Simplify your sentences without sacrificing academic depth. If you have to read it twice to understand it, imagine how your examiner will feel.
Next, let's look at your topic sentences, the very first sentence of your paragraphs. Let's compare these two. A descriptive one sounds like this. The history of education system X began in 1950. That's just a historical fact. It gives zero direction to the argument. Instead, make it analytical, like, Education system X in 1950 functioned as a tool to strengthen social class structures. See the difference? The analytical sentence tells the reader exactly what you're going to prove in that paragraph. It's sharp and it's clear. When you finally hand this draft over to your peers or your supervisor for feedback, keep in mind that this is an intellectual dialogue. Don't take criticism personally or get emotional. You have to rationally evaluate the comments and learn to distinguish between basic formatting suggestions and substantive critiques. Substantive critiques are the ones that really challenge and test the strength of your arguments. And honestly, that's the kind of feedback that will elevate your thesis to the next level.
As you wrestle with your draft tonight, I want you to keep this phrase anchored in your mind. Editing is a knowledge-building process. This whole journey of reviewing, cutting, and reorganizing isn't a punishment for writing a bad first draft. Not at all. It's the process of disciplining your mind, maturing your ideas, and building academic rigor. The willingness to push through this painful process is exactly what separates a true scholar from an amateur.
So, we've walked through the entire anatomy of the editing process, from the macro spine structure right down to the micro-cosmetic details. Your draft is sitting right there on the desk. My question to you today before you step out of this office is this. With your intellectual scalpel in hand, which section of your manuscript are you going to bravely dissect right now? Get out there and sharpen that writing. A brilliant thesis is just waiting to be carved out.